We're talking dynasty trades. Should Dave and I acquire Gibbs-Achan on RotoViz Radio?
What's up, RotoViz?
All right, what's up, RotoViz? It is Curtis, Patrick, and Dave Caban, and this is RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast Dynasty Edition tonight. We started getting into Dynasty last week. We got more to talk about tonight because we got a huge blockbuster trade that came into our inbox over at FFPC at RotoViz TriFlex Dynasty Leagues, high-stakes Dynasty trade involving Mr. Gibbs-Achan. So we're going to get into that here shortly. This episode's brought to you by FFPC. Visit myffpc.com, the home of high-stakes Dynasty Fantasy Football, and of course, of our RotoViz TriFlex Dynasty Leagues, the funnest way to play Dynasty Fantasy Football. All right, Dave, let's wipe that poster because for about the next 5 minutes, we're going to talk about this league we joined and this T. Higgins trade that I made. Then we'll get to Achan here in a minute. So just to spark people's memories, Dave and I adopted a Dynasty orphan last week over at FFPC, and it's a $250 buy-in. It's a nice roster. It needs a little reshaping, and we talked in last week's episode about a couple of the things that we wanted to do. That turned into me sending like 100 Dynasty trade offers over the weekend, Dave. And so far, I've booked one of them, and I did manage to acquire T. Higgins. And so I wanted to see what you thought about this trade and what some of the listeners and viewers thought about this trade. So I'm going to throw that up here on the screen and let's break it down. So I sent Amari Cooper, Jake Ferguson, and the rookie 211 for T. Higgins and the 204. Again, this is FFPC tight end premium settings. And I found that one owner, Dave, I think, that is worried about T. Higgins' landing spot because not only was I able to get younger at the wide receiver position, I was able to upgrade my second round rookie pick. What do you and the doggy think about this move?
I mean, I like Jake Ferguson.
Yeah.
211, I mean, I kind of like. Mari's all right. But, I mean, really, I think that I like the side here of Higgins and the 204 a lot more. I think that the 204 is in a spot where you're likely looking at a slightly different quality of player than the 211. And sure, you have the two players in Ferguson and Cooper versus Higgins, but Higgins and Cooper are at different spots in their career. I think it's very likely, maybe I shouldn't say very likely, but there's a huge possibility. Well, maybe I'm taking your role here and being overly optimistic perhaps. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that Higgins could land in a spot where we really get to see him challenged to be a wide receiver one in a very high percentage of weeks. You have Cooper on the decline. Ferguson has looked good, but I'm not sure that he's the type of player that's good enough that you're guaranteed to have a long window of production for him. And sure, it's a tight end premium league, which helps him to some degree, his utility. But I think that he's still kind of in the range where he's not necessarily separated from a large portion of tight ends as a result of you getting the piece here in Higgins. And in the 204 comparison to the 211, I think you extracted a little bit more value.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was trying to argue like against myself, like, because I think some people will kind of have that same eyebrow raising over T. Higgins. Like if you looked at his weekly stat explorer chart on rotoviz.com, he had 4 wide receiver 1 weeks and he had a bunch of absolute flops. But T. Higgins' season was really weird. You know, he was injured several times during the season. We also had a situation where Joe Burrow got hurt and they're, trying to figure it out with Jake Browning. I mean, the Bengals just had a really, really kind of cursed year. So if you wanted to go recency bias, you could say, T. Higgins had his, most frustrating season. And he's also never been a dynasty wide receiver one or a redraft wide receiver one yet. His best end of season rank ever is wide receiver 19. We don't know if he's still going to be tied to Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, or, what if he ends up in Carolina and Bryce Young is actually bad and he just, goes down the tubes here. So, I think you can make a downside case that, hey, listen, Amari Cooper doesn't really look anywhere close to washed yet. The Browns were 5-1 with Deshaun Watson and won't have Nick Chubb at the beginning of the year next year. Maybe that squad has figured out what to do with Amari, and he posts a couple, age 30 wide receiver 1 seasons like we've seen some guys at his talent level do. And Jake Ferguson ends up still being a mid tight end 1 in FFPC tight end premium. And then, the 204 to 211, it's an upgrade, but all rookie picks in the second round are, less than 50% hits. They're really probably 25% hits. So I think you can argue that I missed this one. However, I think from a pure dynasty value perspective, I got the best pick and I got the best player in terms of value. So I'm giving myself the W, but I am curious, what anybody watching on Twitter or YouTube thinks. Anybody want to make a case against my side in this one before we go on to Devon, Achane, and that big trade? While we're waiting for any questions to come in, Dave, I am going to pull up our updated dynasty rankings. I've got T. Higgins at 35 overall and wide receiver 16. I wanted to see where Sean had him. Sean has him at 36. So we're both kind of dialed in there right at the 3-4 turn in a startup in 2024.
And where is Amari?
Let's see here. For Amari, I've got him at 76 overall, and Sean has him at 108. Okay. So yeah, there's at least like a random rookie first between them probably in terms of value. So yeah, we can probably move on. I think it's most of our viewers are probably going to think that is a win. Let's get on to the big trade conundrum that we've got to break down. So throw that poster back up here because I've got to set the stage for this. So Dave and I take over this new dynasty squad. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs and we've got James Conner and David Montgomery. We've got a little bit of running back depth, but we've got to remake this roster. It's an orphan. And we tried to trade away David Montgomery. We weren't really getting any bites, and that's kind of understandable. He's on the wrong side of 25. He's his own team's RB2. And even though he scored double-digit touchdowns this year, I don't think anybody wants to bank on that happening again. And Gibbs scores, Gibbs scores the sexy fantasy points there in Detroit. And so actually, as we ended last week's show, we wondered, would we have to trade Jahmyr Gibbs in order to actually remake this roster? And so after, 2 or 3 days trying to trade some of these other running backs, I finally started floating some Jahmyr Gibbs offers out there, Dave. And one of them resulted in a counter. I was actually trying to trade for a pair of rookie firsts. It would have been the 104 and the 106 from this competing manager. But he responded with a really interesting trade. I'm going to put it in the chat here for people to respond to as we make our case and honestly figure out what we're going to do, because I think it's a really interesting trade, and I'm not sure which way I'm leaning right now. So in this move, we would send James Conner along with Jahmyr Gibbs for Devon Achane.
Yep.
The 201 and the 204.
Yep.
So what do you think? You haven't seen this offer yet. I told you that we had a big trade coming in and we were going to talk about it tonight. What's your gut tell you on this one? Then we're going to break down the dynasty rankings, some of the metrics, and figure out what the heck to do.
So I will say this. My gut doesn't necessarily tell me to go ahead and make this trade, but if I pause and I think about it for like 2 or 3 seconds, I start to say to myself, yeah, I think this is something I kind of want to do. Now, I forget if you and I were talking about this on air or if it was after we finished recording last week. And I said that, I do have some concerns about Gibbs.
Yeah.
And being able to get more value out of him than a running back that just, kind of is pretty good his first 3 years and then kind of falls off, which I think some people would find surprising, given the fact that, you can make the case he has the receiving chops that make him one of these players that can stick around for a long time. I have a part of me that thinks he found himself in the perfect situation for himself to be in this past season, and that I'm not sure this carries through to future seasons. And I think it's also possible that we have seen the best season of Gibbs that we will. One could push back on that and ask me why I say that. Well, we have done work in the past that shows that running back production tends to just go down after the early seasons and after a player hits a peak. And this could very likely be that peak for Gibbs. Connor is at the point where I think it's easy to equate him to a 201 or a 204, right? So then you're just really left with this question of, you're getting those 2 picks. What does Achane bring to the table? Well, we saw what that could look like last year, right? I mean, if I go over here just to remind everybody, and I click into the Stat Explorer, what you're going to see is that this man finished number 5 in PPR per game, number 25, Curtis, in overall PPR, only played 11 games. Why? Because he had 45% of his weeks be RB1 weeks, went over 20 points 5 times in 11 games, had that monster game with 51 points in week 3, plays on a team where there were 2 older backs ahead of him, showed the explosion. It's very possible if you give him 16 games, 17 games next season, you give Gibbs the same, that we're looking at Achane being the one that is the better option to have on a week-to-week basis. As a result of that, though, you know, you still might have that odd gut feeling because some of the recency bias of Achane being hurt, of Gibbs playing for the Lions in the playoffs, getting a couple extra games there. I think I have to overrule and say at the end of the day, I would want to go ahead and make this move. This is the type of one, makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable to do, but I can see a number of reasons as to why this makes our team better than it is if we do not make it.
Let's get rid of that visual. I want to put a comment up here on the screen because in I was doing a little bit of research just to contextualize Gibbs-Achan's season. So Dave, the entire list of running backs in NFL history with 7 or more yards per carry in a season with 100 or more rushing attempts, this is the entire list. Gibbs-Achan. That's the entire list in NFL history. Wow. We've had a couple instances over 6 yards a carry, and it's been some really awesome names like Barry Sanders and Jamal Charles in recent years. But that's the whole list. Only one guy. And this isn't just Super Bowl era. I went back to the 30s. Nobody's done this except Achane. So I liked your breakdown and contextualizing his season. I think that we should look a little deeper at Gibbs first too, because the real question here in terms of a dynasty roster is how close are these 2 players? Do we feel like moving forward, understanding that the Lions have a running back by committee, and that's probably not going away, understanding that the Dolphins will also probably have a running back by committee that's not going away, but that, that gap between Achane and Raheem Mostert, the 10 years, that's a little different than the situation in Detroit.
Sure.
And Achane could ascend to get those 20+ touchdowns that Mostert got. Gibbs already kind of is on top and showed us what that top looks like in Detroit. So can we envision a situation where over the next 2 years or so, Achane outscores Gibbs and becomes more valuable? I think that's a question that we ask ourselves, because I do agree with you. James Conner is the equivalent of, a higher end rookie second right now, because he's probably, he looks set up to be, an RB1 again in 2024. He finished extremely strong when Kyler Murray was back out there, but he's a month-to-month asset, let alone a year-to-year asset right now. He's very late 20s. So let's look at Gibbs here for a minute and then come back and ultimately answer the question. We do have, while we're checking in here, before you do that, we've got one listener coming in here, David Philippi, fellow RotoVizian here. He says he thinks it's a winner with the extra second. What do you guys think? I'm looking to crowdsource a little bit here because this is a tough one. While Dave breaks down Gibbs, let me know what you think. Achane and the picks, or Gibbs and Conner? Which side do you like?
Okay, so if you start breaking down Gibbs' rookie year, one of the first things I think that you'll look at here is that he finished number 8 among running backs in 8 PPR per game, and also was number 9 in expected points per game. And it is hard to deny how impressive those 9 expected points per game are for a player in his rookie season, especially when you could say that it took maybe till around like the middle of the year for him to really get that true run in the offense. He was number 20 in fantasy points over expectation per game. My guess is last year we will not see this number here. We'll probably see it dip down, probably beyond like 40 at a minimum, unless Gibbs ends up being one of these players that manages to either be an outlier or flirt with being an outlier for a couple of years. He was number 6 in yards per carry here. Number 8 in targets, which sure, that is huge. Number 16 in receiving yards, number 9 in total touchdowns, 10 in overall PPR, was an RB1 in 40% of games, an RB2 in 13% of games. When he was an RB1 in all of those games, went for at least 21.5 points, and he did manage to go for between 25 and 30 in 4 games. If we take a look, Curtis, at his game log, we'll see that he actually was getting heavily used as a receiver even early on. In week 2 against Seattle, saw 9 targets. Week 7 against Baltimore, saw 10. Then it was kind of, up and down, but averaging somewhere around 5 or 6 across the rest of the season. So definitely, one of the solid rookie seasons that we've probably seen from a running back. Even if we go back 10 years, I think this is still one of those that falls into the bucket of a player delivering on where they got drafted in the NFL draft. And I think probably also delivering on where fantasy gamers were drafting this player. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go into the screener and pull up a couple of things here for a second, Curtis, while I let you say a couple of things.
While you do that, I mean, another way that you could break down this trade is try to figure out, what could you actually get for this 201 and 204? Who are those players going to be? Because we're not making this deal in August. I mean, we're making this deal potentially in February. And so after you're done with the screener here, I've got a handful of names that I think could be available at the 201 for us. And then, maybe if I could even get this grouping to 5 or 6 guys, we could get 2 of these players, I think, at the 201 and 204. Then we can really start to see what would this trade overall do for our roster. There's some pretty exciting names and pretty exciting prospects that I think could slide here because it is a deep wide receiver class. And there's going to be a lot of quarterback intrigue in Superflex. There's also a high-end tight end that will probably go in the first round of rookie drafts as well. So it could push some of those running backs. So we're trading 2 running backs away. I think we could maybe get one back at the top of the second here, as well as a receiver. And receiver is really where we need help on this squad. So that's encouraging. All right. What have you found in the screener? And then we'll come back and look at these rookie picks.
So what I found is if you look for running backs, I actually forget if we did this exercise live with Gibbs or if I looked at this outside of that. So if I've already mentioned this on air, everybody, you're just going to have to forgive me. We've been, when you do 100 plus of these a year, it's easy for them to blend in. But so Gibbs, if you look at players that rookie season, guys drafted in the first 2 rounds, you get guys like Trent Richardson, Leonard Fournette, Joseph Dye, Chris Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, CEH, Jonathan Taylor, Maurice Jones-Drew, Ronnie Brown, DeAndre Swift, Ken Walker, Bijan Robinson, Jeremy Hill, Lawrence Maroney, TJ Yeldon, LaShawn McCoy. All right. Fantastic company there. So some of the things that I've said, I do think that there are certainly fair pushbacks against, as that is a really, really good group. Jahmyr Gibbs, if you take those numbers that we put in there, and you look at his, actually, we should probably hold off on talking about that till I have more time to digest that. But I guess the final thing that I will bring this back to here, Curtis, is the numbers for Gibbs are probably good enough that perhaps I will admit, I think I might have been too hard on Gibbs at first blush here. Okay. But the problem is I do feel like Achane could easily land himself in that group too, especially if we got to see the full run from him the whole year. So I apologize to everybody for just wasting about 3 minutes.
It's fine, man. It's fine to get a little bit mixed up on these tough deals because we're talking about a couple players that are now at the tippy top of their position. I mean, case in point, if you look at our RotoViz Dynasty tiers, Sean and I are keeping those live on the site. I mean, these guys are in the same tier. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs averages out as the Dynasty RB1 because that's where Sean's got him and I've got him at 3. But it's kind of a tiebreaker situation because we've both got Gibbs, Breece Hall, that is Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane, all in that same tier together. And so if they're in the same tier, are we splitting hairs? You know, or should we just take this value, stay in the tier and essentially get, another starter level player, with this potential second? So let's do one last thing, because what I'm hearing you break down over the course of looking at, the NFL Stat Explorer and some of the screener exercises, we contextualize Achane's performance last year and the running back by committees in each of these teams. We can use the prospect box score scout to look at a couple players and see what type of upside is available at the top of the second round. So at rotoviz.com, you can go to the prospect box score scout. You can look at any player that is in this year's class. And you can, even though we don't have combine measurables, we can't really, we can use player reported 40s, team reported 40s, those types of things like that. We have pretty good weight. And then we can make some pretty good guesses, at least if a player is going to be day 1, day 2, day 3 at this point in the process. Sure, some people, could fail a drug test or interview terribly or, run a 42-10s faster than expected, but pretty good idea when these guys are going to be drafted. So Dave, do you want to know which receivers I think will be available at the top of the second, or which running backs? What do you want to look at first? Let's do maybe 2 names at each position and just get a sense of the upside.
Let's just start with the running backs because we're already kind of in that space.
Okay. So the top 4 or so running back, I'll say top 5. The top 5 running backs in this year's class in whatever order at this point.
Yep.
Jonathan Brooks from Texas, Braylon Allen from Wisconsin, Trey Benson, Florida State, Blake Corum, Michigan, and Bucky Irving, Oregon. Now, if I look at some of like the early rookie mocks that I've been part of and some rookie rankings, I don't think that, I would be very shocked if the rookie RB1 or really even the rookie RB2 slid all the way to 201 in any rookie draft. Even in a TriFlex format like what we're playing here, it's hard to imagine getting past positional or not getting past positional player number 2 in any set. So let's just assume that, the universe doesn't gift us something. I think let's just look at Trey Benson and Blake Corum and the prospect box score scout. So I've got Trey Benson pulled up here right now. And
I'm a big Trey Benson fan. So I'm not saying necessarily as a prospect, just a big Trey Benson fan in general. Okay. But that will probably factor into that. Fun back to watch. Anyways, go ahead.
So here's high level on Trey Benson. All right. So Trey Benson goes to Oregon, ends up transferring to Florida after his first season in Oregon, puts up a pair of pretty efficient seasons here, Dave, around 6 yards a carry for his career, 150 rushing attempts and over 900 rushing yards in each of his last 2 seasons and 23 combined rushing touchdowns in those 2 seasons. Also caught 33 passes. He is probably going to be a 3rd round pick unless he really shocks at the combine. I do think he'll be a day 2 pick. He weighs 221 without entering for 40. So if we just look at draft capital, weight, and obviously his production metrics.
Yep.
He pulls up Kerryon Johnson, TJ Yeldon, DJ Dallas, Kendre Miller, Tyrion Davis Price, Matt Jones, Darius Geis, CJ Prosise, Tank Bigsby, DeAndre Swift. That is his first page of prospects. So the 40 is really that's gonna be an impact here. Let me see what I can find on a projection. 4.45 for a projection on a 40, and let's see what that does to his list.
Okay.
He may be able to run under that. So that doesn't update it too much. Most of those guys were already pretty fast in the cohort.
Yep.
So, I mean, what do you think about that? Carry on what was an injury case. Darius Geis had the draft pedigree and unfortunately kind of tanked, his career. And then DeAndre Swift obviously being, the nicest name on that list. So you do see, even though this would be a rookie second round pick, you do see 3 players that I think would have an upside case out of his top 10 matches. And then this speaks to the fact that, second round rookie picks are no sure things, but there is a little bit of upside available there.
Sure. Well, I mean, for a player where we've input, that expected draft spot, I actually think that's a pretty good list of matches. Well, none of those, or I shouldn't say none of them, but not many of those guys ever became real stars. There were plenty on that list that had a couple of year stretches of fantasy runs of being viable. And I think that Benson looks to be the type of back that does have the ability to support the beginning of his career, matching to what some of those backs have done. You had to like the way that he came into Florida State in just his second year, contributed immediately, was a very impactful player for them. The interesting thing, though, Curtis, is if you followed the team last year, you did see the team using Lawrence Toafili, who's very good as well, in a lot of situations where it does call into question if Benson is on a roster with another back when that team really needs them. Who are they going to go with? Because there was many times where it felt like Benson could get the team this big spark, make a big play here and there. But when they found themselves in certain situations, especially passing situations, they were going the way of Toafili. So is he a good enough of a pure rusher to be able to operate, in the type of level we might need him early on in his career if he's not getting heavily involved in the passing game? Time will tell, especially if he's drafted where we think that he will be. But I think that this is a good example of the type of player that we might be able to use one of these picks on. Of course, we'll have to see how things shake out. So I'm curious if we look at a wide receiver, what that level of player is looking like this year as well.
I'm going to throw Blake Corum in here quickly.
Okay.
That was the other running back that I think could be available in this range if we don't want to get down, even further into the list, and Bucky Irving. And Bucky Irving certainly has a lot of fans, as he should. We can talk about these rookies more in depth on another upcoming episode. But if we give Blake Corum day 3 draft capital as well, draft pick 75, he's currently weighing 214. I've got him at a 4 and change in the 40. We'll leave the non-power 5 conference players in there for running back because I think that matters. We get Darius Geis, Darrington Evans, Michael Carter, Kendre Miller, Bryce Love, Royce Freeman, Tyjae Spears, who has a lot of fans right now, Kerryon Johnson, Darrell Henderson, and Raquel Armstead. If we just go a couple players deeper, we can also get Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams, and Nick Chubb, as well as Sony Michel. So some of his matches just a little bit deeper outside that top 10, a little bit more favorable for Corum versus Benson. Again, it's not, there's no home runs here, but you can see some names that would give you some pause for some upside. I agree. Let's look at some of the wide receivers here. Now at the top of the second round, for wide receiver, you might find, if it was an early rookie draft right now, you might find Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. You could find Ladd McConkey out of Georgia, who we talked about last week. You might find Jalen Polk out of Washington, also in this range. It's possible in a QB happy situation that you could even get Brian Thomas out of LSU. Although I do think that the wide receiver position is still a little bit up for grabs. So we'll have to look at that. I think Brian Thomas would be a best case, but I wouldn't expect him to make it there. So probably the first one we'd want to look at maybe is Adonai Mitchell. And then the second we could look at, we already looked at Ladd McConkey last week. So let's look at Jalen Polk as the other.
Okay.
All right. Adonai Mitchell.
I have to ask, how do we spell that first name?
Adonai.
Got him. Okay. Texas 2021 to 2023. Yep.
Yep, we got him there. So let me find just a current height weight on Achane.
Yep, looks like he started his career 2 seasons at Georgia, then transfers to Texas as a rookie. 4 receiving touchdowns, receiving dominator of 0.12. Pretty good yards per reception, though, in at 14.69. That was so in 12 games, in just 4 games in his second year at Georgia, gets 3 receiving touchdowns on 9 receptions. It's not till we see him arrive in Texas, Curtis, where he really got to play, make a pretty big impact with 11 touchdowns, 15.3 yards per reception, 55 catches, and 845 yards.
All right. So Adonai Mitchell, there's the career rundown there. He's currently slated in as a borderline round 1, round 2 pick. So he's probably going to be at the end of the first round, maybe early second round, pending combine measurables. I'm going to go ahead and use draft pick 40 and just say, hey, he's going to be a day 2 guy. Weighs in at 196, projects out of 4.5 in the 40. That gives us a pretty interesting list of wide receiver names, Dave. John Mechie, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, T. Higgins. That's the top 4. Getting down below that, there's still a little bit more quality. You get Terrace Marshall, who is also a second-round pick, Dante Pettis, Riley Ridley, Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas, that's the Ohio State University Michael Thomas, the good one. And then Lynn Bowden Jr. and Alex Pierce. That's a lot of quality. What
year range are you in there?
What's that?
Are you using 2013 on, or
I just got the last decade, 2014 through 2023.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay.
Look at the last decade. So a lot of quality there. I mean, with Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, T. Higgins, those are all players that actually have quite a bit of dynasty value even now. And then obviously Michael Thomas, one of the more, one of the most productive receivers of the last decade. So a lot of quality sims there for Adonai Mitchell. That is pretty intriguing. We should look at another guy or two as well. Any reactions to the Mitchell sims there?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty interesting group. And I think that this also gives a good window into the type of quality of a player that you might be able to select with that pick. I mean, sure, there's some misses on here, but there's a number of guys that if you get them onto your team, that's a player that's contributing for a while. We'll have to see how things look once we get a better idea of how these players will fall. But it does make me think that, especially having those 2 swings with those 2 picks in round 2, that does become pretty attractive. Now, there's one thing that we'll have to go back to that I want to look at, which is 2024 early underdog ADP for redraft, which we're going to come back to because I think there's something interesting there after we look at these rookies. So who are we looking at now?
The other guy we're going to look at here is Jalen Polk out of Washington. And so, a lot of eyes on Washington wide receivers because of Roma Dunze, but Jalen Polk, the other guy there, he's going to be a second rounder. I think he's going to be a second rounder. I'm going to put in pick 55. He's 205 weight and a 4.48 in the 40. Is the current data on him. So let's see. Why don't you run down his career quickly while I'm pulling up some sims, and then we'll put a bow on this thing.
Yes, I will do that once things come up. I have too many apps running right now on my computer, and with the cameras and what have you, we're lagging a little bit. So I'm just filling the space here by filibustering more or less.
All right. What before we look at Polk, which way are you starting to lean on this trade? I mean, we've only got about 10% of the research left here, and we're gonna have to make a call.
Yeah, so I think I'm leaning towards making the trade, and there's a major reason for that we will get to. But I do have up Polk's career numbers now. Played 10 games as a freshman, but only 28 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns, 264 yards. We see his impact happen on his third year at Washington with a receiving dominator of 0.17, 6 touchdowns, 41 receptions. Best year comes as the senior, 0.25 on the receiving dominator, 16.8 yards per reception on 69 receptions. So we did go over the 1,100 mark.
Well, Polk's sims aren't quite as rosy as Mitchell's were. Okay, so at draft pick 55, weight 205, 40, just under 4.5. We get Josh Palmer, Amari Rogers, Jonathan Mingo. Not exactly an inspiring top trio there. We do get Rashee Rice. So you like to see that. I mean, he's a player on the come for sure. Chris Conley, Chris Moore, Deshaun Hamilton, Jesu Chesson, Fitzpatrick, Gary Jennings. So just on the surface, his production profile with the expected draft capital and physical measurements make Polk look quite a bit like a bust. But I mean, this is not a perfect science, obviously. You know, the more sims that you can get, it kind of funnels a player into a higher, probability of success. But, there are always outliers. So at this point in the game, looks like maybe he would not be a player that will rank highly in our initial set of RotoViz rookie ranks. But again, it speaks to the second round picks not exactly being, guarantees, but we did find a little bit of quality here. And, I think we've got to make a decision now, Dave.
So I'm going to pull up one more thing here, Curtis, which I think is kind of telling. Now, obviously, we're playing Dynasty for a window of time, and you have to consider that. But I do think that the valuation of a player at the current moment in time is a good way to get some type of calibration. And if we do a little crowdsourcing here and we use underdog ADP from early 24 drafts as a way to do that, what you will see is that you actually have Bijan Robinson going 2 picks ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is going to go around the turn around 1, followed by Kyron Williams. Then you do have Jonathan Taylor in there and Achane coming in maybe 10 or so picks back. If we look at this in a draft grid, right, we got Gibbs, like I said, towards the end of round 1. And then we have, let's see. So Achane, do you see him on this list, Curtis?
It's too small for my eyes, the size that you have on the monitor there.
Gotcha. So, all right, we got Achane midway through the second. What does this tell me? It tells me that even in the current year, they're graded fairly similarly. They're kind of in that range where that's the same tier. And if we're trying to project these guys out a couple of years, is there anything compelling that we can point to for Gibbs as a reason that he's that far separated from Achane? Otherwise, I think we got to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I can't point to anything. I think what you could do is you could say, what would happen if each of these players consolidated the work from their offenses, right? We already did get to see a little bit of that with Gibbs, and he smashed. We actually haven't really seen that with Achane over an extended period, like we got to see in Detroit with Gibbs for that 3-game stretch or so toward the middle of the season this year. Raheem Mostert and his 20+ touchdowns, I mean, those could evaporate. I mean, what if Achane was getting all of these green zone touches for the Dolphins offense? Now, Tyreek Hill's retirement on the horizon. We can just go as deep with this thing as you want.
Yeah.
The Lions look set up at the position, the positions across the board, maybe just a little bit better than the Dolphins, but we know Mike McDaniel, man, he is the running back whiz, and he's going to be there in Miami for the long run. Health is the only question for any running back, and that's might be the question that people would pull on Achane there. But yeah, I'm leaning this way too. As good as Connor was at the end of the season, we've never really, it's never really been our brand or really any big time dynasty outlets brand to bet big on older running backs. You'd rather get out while you can. And for us to be able to say we could transition James Conner into an early second round pick and then flip Gibbs for Achane within the same dynasty tier agreed upon by me and Sean Siegel and still pick up an extra second, those feel like wins. They're not smash wins. And I'm going to put this on X after the episode, and it's probably going to be 50-50 on 1,000 votes, right? That just means it's a good dynasty trade for both managers. So it won't be clear until we let the thing play out. Dave, one last bit of context as I look at our team situation here. We also own the 111 in this draft for this roster. So that'll give us 3 players in that range that we just talked about, not just 2. I don't want to double count the 111. We already have that. So it's not like a reason to make this trade. But when we're talking like in uncertainties at this 1-2 turn, it does, maybe we have the opportunity to build that wide receiver depth here a little bit, which is what the team needs, using a couple of those picks on some wide receivers and then BPA with the third. Maybe that's running back. Maybe it's not. Maybe one of the quarterback slides, we build some depth there. But I think we got to do it, man. It's scary. But I think we're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it gives us some flexibility with the way that those picks are set up. And then, maybe with the way this falls into our strategy, once we start drafting, we have some other options. But we've said it before, we should say it again. Sometimes you have to make yourself uncomfortable to push your team forward. Yeah. This is an orphan that we took over. We knew we were going to have to make some moves. Gibbs happens to be the piece that is in play right now for us to do it with. And even though it's uncomfortable, I think we got to go forward and do it.
Oh, boy. All right. Hold on here. Hold on. I gotta share the screen. I gotta share the screen for the people that are tuned in. We'll let them watch this one go through.
Okay. Oh, you're actually gonna.
I'm gonna do it live here, and I'm actually gonna do something kind here because we had a couple different back and forths with this other manager in this league, and so many dynasty trades get sent back and forth with no response or just a blanket denial, whatever. This other team, Pittman Bros in our league, it's going to be fun playing in a league with these guys because they've given good feedback. They've told me what they didn't like about certain offers. They've told me what they wanted to see, and if I was going to counter. And this trade evolved over the course of several denials on other trade constructs. So I'm going to tell them great offer. Hope this works out for both of us, but maybe a little more on our side. Smiley face. Okay, here we go, baby. We are locking it. And it's done.
It is in the books.
And it's done. All right, Dave. I think that is quite enough. That is quite enough for this episode. Later this week, we have a big opportunity to get into some of the updated dynasty rankings from Sean and myself, some of the tiers. So maybe in an episode, we can get some of your reaction to where I've got some of these players slotted in. And then, we've got an open show for Thursday night. So if you are tuning in and you got a suggestion for a show, something you want to hear us break down, be sure to let us know on X or at the email, and we will see if we can work you in. Until next time, it's Curtis and Dave on RotoViz Radio.